President Trump is in his announcement called it the potential Manhattan Project of our time. It's a big undertaking. But I do think that if we bring the public along and even allow the public to participate in airing areas where they're encountering government waste or bureaucracy and surface that, we're able to make this something that isn't just top down, but also bottom up. And dare I say, unite the country. We want to do something different with DOGE, which is we've actually put a finite expiry date on it. I think it was Reagan who famously said there's no such thing as a government program that doesn't live. It's the best evidence we have for eternal life. And, I don't think it has to be that way. With DOGE, we've set an expiry date of July 4th, 2026, which is a fitting date because that's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And we can think of no better gift to give our country on its 250th birthday than a federal government that is massively downsized to a scale and scope that it would make our founders proud.
As the one and only Vivek Ramaswamy giving us a taste of what to expect from DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, we now know what Trump's plans are to dismantle the administrative state, and they are very bold and they are very sweeping. Now, those plans are, of course, coming by way of none other than the twin heads of DOGE itself, Elon Musk and Vivek. They recently wrote and published an essay in the Wall Street Journal entitled "The DOGE Plan to Reform Government." It's a very revealing piece wherein they detail their plans on how to tackle the federal debt, which is currently standing at a completely unsustainable $35 trillion. They go over how they're going to cut billions in government expenditures and how they are going to fire tens of thousands of bureaucrats who make up permanent Washington. And both Elon and Vivek are keenly aware of just how nefarious these tens of thousands of bureaucrats really are and what a threat they are to the constitutional order of our republic. Here is what they write, quote, "Most legal edicts in America today are not laws enacted by Congress, but rules and regulations promulgated by unelected bureaucrats, tens of thousands of them each and every year. Most government enforcement decisions and discretionary expenditures aren't made by the democratically elected president or even his political appointees, but by millions of unelected, unappointed civil servants within government agencies who view themselves as immune from firing thanks to civil service protections." Now, the key to those civil service protections is the protection from retaliation. Okay, this is what you got to get. One of the reasons why, if not the reason why, it's so hard to fire or lay off a government worker is because the law shields them from political retaliation. So this is the key barrier that stands in the way of Trump mass firing the administrative state. Nevertheless, both Elon and Vivek are zeroing in on the heart of the problem, right? Roger Kimball of American Greatness actually just wrote an excellent piece about this. And he notes that while Article 1 of the Constitution vests all legislative power in Congress, just as Article 3 vests all judicial authority in the court, since at least 1940, an administrative state and the tens of thousands of unelected bureaucrats who work for that administrative state have risen up precisely to circumvent both the legislature and the courts. That's absolutely essential to get. In other words, real legislative power has been increasingly concentrated in what some are calling administrative bureaus rather than in Congress. So our laws today are not authored by and large. We're talking 99% of our laws are not authored by democratically elected congressmen. They're authored by these unelected bureaucrats who comprise permanent Washington, unelected bureaucrats who occupy administrative agencies and who author laws that serve to further empower those agencies. And the courts up until like literally months ago. We'll talk about that in a sec. And the courts have shielded them and protected them. It's so essential to understand that both Congress and the courts have, for whatever reason, yielded their power and authority to these unelected bureaucrats, at least since the 1940s. And the result has been the rise of what some are calling a state within a state, a sort of parallel legal and political structure populated by unelected bureaucrats. And these bureaucrats are increasingly binding citizens to laws, not through congressionally enacted statutes, but through the edicts of a managerial bureaucracy, the administrative state. And what, of course, that does is it interrupts our Democrat feedback loop, our democratic feedback loop. So if congressmen are passing laws we don't like, what do? Well, we could just vote in different congressmen. But if the laws that are binding, 99% of them, don't go through the legislative process, then there's no way to hold these unelected bureaucrats accountable for the laws that we don't like. And that is exactly what Elon and Vivek are zeroing in on. And so what do Elon and Vivek propose to do to dismantle this colossus, this monster, this octopus, this Leviathan? First, gang, I do want to give a huge shout out to today's sponsor. That's Fume Flavored Air. Gang, I'll be the first to admit that bad habits can be a struggle for anyone, myself included. And when I hear about a solution to solving a bad habit I know many people deal with, I can't wait to share it with you. And what if I told you that there was an enjoyable and fun alternative to one of the most prevalent bad habits in our society? Well, there is. And that's where Fume comes in. This new flavored air device is quickly becoming the fantastic alternative to those pesky old choices. It's an award-winning flavored air device with exceptional flavor, and it's a guilt-free option with non-toxic flavors like orange vanilla or crisp mint. It's like having your own favorite herbal tea and knowing you can feel good about it. The best part about Fume is that it fills a void when you're trying to kick those nasty habits, and it's one more way that courageous conservatives can fight back against the left and their agenda to keep Americans down. So why not give Fume a try? They conduct third-party studies, have amazing quality control of their products, and they're developed with real doctors right here in the USA. Join the over 300,000 Fume users, and for a limited time, use my code Steve Turley to get your free Fume base when you order the Journey Pack. Head to tryfume.com and use code Steve Turley or scan the QR code on the screen. Get a free Fume base with any Journey Pack order. Trust me, gang, this is one swap you can feel great about. What's there to lose? Click on that link or scan the QR code right now. First and foremost, they are going to identify and hire a lean team of small government crusaders, including some of the sharpest technical and legal minds in America. This team will work in the new administration closely with the White House Office of Management and Budget. The two of us will advise DOGE at every step to pursue three major kinds of reform: regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings. We will focus particularly on driving change through executive action. That's going to be key. If you're taking notes here, you want to write that down. We will focus particularly on driving change through executive action based on existing legislation rather than passing new laws. Now, there's something really exciting here, and Richard Kimball highlights this. There are two important Supreme Court decisions. Actually, both Elon and Vivek highlight these Supreme Court decisions in their op-ed for the Wall Street Journal. These are two very, very important ones. The first is West Virginia versus the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. This is a decision the Supreme Court rendered back in 2022. And this decision says that agencies may not impose regulations dealing with major economic or policy questions unless Congress specifically authorizes them to do so. So it's a decision that basically dismantles the administrative state at the legislative level. The administrative state is now accountable to Congress based on that decision. But of course, we've had no executive administration to enforce that accountability, with Biden being, what shall we say, cognitively AWOL. Okay. So that's the first thing. You have the West Virginia versus the EPA, which in effect returns power back to the legislature, to Congress. And then the second major Supreme Court decision is their recent overturning of the Chevron doctrine earlier this year. And that was absolutely huge. If you don't know what the Chevron decision was, this goes back to 1984. It's what's called the Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council case. The Supreme Court back in 84 ruled that courts had to give deference to federal agencies as the experts when it comes to creating regulations based on an ambiguous law. It's a mouthful, but basically what that means is Congress routinely enacts open-ended laws, right? Some vague or ambiguous environmental law. Maybe it might be just, this law, a Clean Air Act, and this law will require that the air be clean. So it's very ambiguous. And then what they do is they give huge latitude to regulative agencies to work out the details. And they can even continue to change and adjust the details as time goes on. Now, they can't do that anymore because of the West Virginia decision versus the EPA, which returned power back to the legislature. They can't exercise any powers that that Congress does not expressly give to them. But nevertheless, the Chevron decision is precisely why regulatory agencies have accumulated so much power. The Supreme Court, again, this going back to 84 in the Chevron decision, the Supreme Court originally gave these regulatory agencies literally unlimited power in that there was no legal recourse to challenge their regulations. The Chevron decision basically made regulatory agencies the, quote, experts in their respective fields, and all the courts in the country were required to just defer to the regulatory agency's interpretation of the ambiguous or vague law passed by Congress. So what this means is that for the past 40 years, federal agencies have been able to interpret laws to mean whatever they want them to mean. And the courts basically had to go along with it. That's why the legal practice was called the Chevron deference, and it put bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats, in charge of the nation. It's how OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, remember this? This is how OSHA was able to mandate that everyone who worked for a company of 100 employees or more had to get vaccinated or else be fired. No law gave OSHA that authority. OSHA regulatory officials, unelected regulatory officials, just made it up. And courts had to sign with it. Well, those days are now over. They are now over as a result of the Supreme Court's overturning of the Chevron decision earlier this year. And so the West Virginia versus the EPA case took power away from the administrative state and gave it back to Congress, whereas what? The overturning of the Chevron decision returned power where? Back to the courts. Now the courts can push back all they want against regulatory agencies. And so we've really just been waiting for an administration, a responsible executive administration, to form something like DOGE to come in and clean up the mess that these two Supreme Court decisions in effect created. And that is exactly what Elon and Vivek are doing. And to me, this is the most brilliant part of their plan. What they're going to do is they are going to enact everything, all of their reforms, through the power of the presidency through executive orders. But this is key, right? Because the very first thing you say is, oh, no, if you do it through executive orders, doesn't that now mean that, say Kamala gets in 2028? I doubt she'll even win a single primary. But regardless, she comes in 2028 and she could just reverse all these executive orders, right? Why would we want to do this? These executive orders that they have planned will roll back regulations that wrongly bypass Congress on the one hand and the courts on the other. After those regulations are fully rescinded by executive order, a future president will not be able to simply flip the switch and revive them, but would instead have to ask Congress's permission to do so, precisely because the Supreme Court's West Virginia decision returned that power to the legislature, and the executive order simply enacted and realized that return. And the courts are 100% behind that with the overturning of the Chevron decision. That's the heart of dismantling the administrative state as far as DOGE is concerned. A blitzkrieg of executive orders from Trump's desk will enact regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings, and no future president can simply flip the switch back and reverse them, since the powers that once belonged to these administrative and regulatory agencies will be returned to Congress, and it is Congress now who stands in the way of them being enacted with Supreme Court approval. It's absolutely brilliant stuff. And so this dismantling of the regulatory octopus will then in turn enable the real goals of DOGE, beginning with the mass firings throughout the administrative state, throughout the state, within the state, right? And this is what, again, Vivek and Elon write here. The number of federal employees to cut should be at least proportionate to the number of federal regulations that are nullified. Not only are fewer employees required to enforce fewer regulations, but the agency would produce fewer regulations once its scope of authority is properly limited. Won't that simply swell the ranks of the unemployed? Not if it's done right. Employees whose positions are eliminated deserve to be treated with respect, and DOGE's goal is to help support their transition into the private sector. Elon and Vivek are actually promising to help the tens of thousands of laid off bureaucrats find work in the private sector. Move them out. Make sure you move them out in Northern Virginia, whatever you do, so we can flip Virginia red finally. This is amazing stuff. So it's a detailed plan, but it basically boils down to two verticals. All right. They're going to the power of the presidency to issue a number of executive orders to dismantle the agencies and regulations that have surpassed Congress and the courts, reallocate those functions to the legislature so they can't be usurped again by executive order. And then once that vertical is complete, then you fire all personnel in accordance with the amount of regulatory administrative cuts that were dismantled by the executive orders. It's perfect. In other words, you can't expect to keep a job that no longer exists. And that most likely will get around all the legal challenges, since there's no political retribution. Your job doesn't exist anymore. And again, to me, this is what's so essential. Most of the proposals that I've read on dismantling the administrative state actually start with the firings. I was just reading one today. Let's start first. The first thing Trump's got to do is got to fire 200,000 people. Well, that's not going to work. Even this person admitted that it would go through years of court challenges. It does not start with mass layoffs. What makes Elon's and Vivek's proposal so good, so sound, is they actually start with the executive orders dismantling the administrative state, removing the job positions in accordance with two major Supreme Court decisions. So they've got Supreme Court cover, as it were. And then what that does is they organically remove the employees who no longer have those jobs anymore. So this is Trump's plan to dismantle the administrative state. And it really looks like nothing is going to be able to stop it. What a gift for the 250th anniversary of our republic.